I'm very excited to be giving this class. There are a lot of dimensions to this text that we'll be looking at. In a way, this text is kind of a microcosm of Baha'u'llah's whole revelation.
Oh, wow.
I think of it as, it's like, in the sense that it takes up what we might consider to be the fundamental theme or problem that Baha'u'llah is solving. It takes that up and it discusses the answer to that problem. In a nutshell, the problem that Baha'u'llah is solving is the problem of diversity of religion. That there are so many different races, tribes, warring each other over who has the right idea of God. And one way of summarizing Baha'u'llah's mission is that he's addressing this problem of the diversity of religion. He's offering a solution to it. And Gems of the Divine Mysteries can be seen as his first iteration of presenting his solution. Almost, I don't want to say a practice, because it came before the Kitab-i-Gan, like right before the Kitab-i-Gan. And the Kitab-i-Gan is kind of like the full expression, the whole solution, delivered in a way that has come down to us as his principal doctrinal work. Whereas Gems of Divine Mysteries is something nobody really knew about before it was translated and made available not that many years ago. So in 2000, whenever it came out, 2003 or 2004. Most people in English-speaking world didn't know anything about it, partly because we didn't even know a summary of it, because often it's the case with untranslated major Baha'i writings that Shoghi Effendi will have referred to it in his history in God Passes By, or we might have read about it somewhere. Tahirzadeh does talk about it, but Shoghi Effendi just mentions it in passing in God Passes By, doesn't summarize the contents. So, and also with other major works of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi would typically have extracted and translated as part of it, and maybe put it in gleanings or something like that. But with Gems of Divine Mysteries, there is no part of it has previously been translated by Shoghi Effendi. So the translators also had nothing to go on when it came time to translate this work. There was no sort of starting point of translations by Shoghi Effendi. I have here, and the question was, is there what's lost in translation? And I'll just read to you in Arabic the opening line, which is translated in English, and you'll get a sense of, even in not knowing Arabic, I think you'll hear for yourself a little bit about what's being lost. So the translation of the opening line is kind of an exordium. The essence of the divine mysteries in the journeys of ascent set forth for those who long to draw nigh to God, the Almighty, the ever-forgiving. Blessed be the righteous that quaff from these crystal streams. And that's the opening phrase. So in Arabic it sounds like this: Javahiru'l-Asrar fi ma'arij al-asfari liman arada an yataqarraba ila Allah al-muqtadir al-ghaffari fahani'an lil-abrari alladhi yashribuna min hadha al-anhar. So there's an internal rhyme of this R, the long A and R. And that kind of internal rhyming is Baha'u'llah's writings are shot through with that kind of rhyming. Sometimes it extends, as this does, throughout an entire sentence, and he sort of takes a word and just kind of runs with it, and then you'll find a dozen words in a row that all have that kind of rhyme. And sometimes it's just a pair of words, but it's a very common feature of the text. I'll pass this around just so you can also see this is one example of writings of Baha'u'llah that have been translated. Not translated. Just this is how they're often published. This is a.
Is that not his hand?
This is a publication not in his hand from the 60s.
This is from his hand, though, isn't it?
And this, I'll talk about this. This is the Arabic version of Gems of Divine Mysteries that was done in the same format as the English, as was the case with the Kitab-i-Gan, which was revealed in Persian by and large, with a whole bunch of Arabic phrases and quotations, but by and large in Arabic, because the questions from the uncle of the Bab, which gave rise to the Kitab-i-Gan, were in Persian. The uncle of the Bab primarily spoke Persian. So presumably this Yusuf, I think Yusuf Sehtihi, who was the recipient of this, must have Sayyid Yusuf Sehtihi Asfahani must have primarily been an Arabic speaker. And Baha'u'llah also was demonstrating that he has complete grasp of both languages and is able to write sort of equally with equal eloquence in either language, which itself is really quite an amazing feat for a Persian native. They would have been expected, anyone especially of the class that Baha'u'llah was, of the nobility, he would have been expected to have studied the Quran and learned the Quran, as a sort of in primary school. So he would have known Arabic, but not expected to have been like a really fluent speaker of Arabic, let alone one who could compose a treatise like this in this as we've heard in like a day and a night, which is one. So it turns out the only reason we even know we would have kind of figured out what the question is by reading the answer and kind of guessed at what the nature of the question was. But it turns out that by whatever historical accident, we have the original text of Gems of Divine Mysteries written out in the hand of one of the professional scribes. I don't know who the scribe is here. So it's not like the draft that would have either been in Baha'u'llah's hand or in the hand of his amanuensis. If Mirza al-Rajan, his amanuensis, was employed at this time, because this was before the Kitab-i-Gan was revealed. So I'm not even sure if Baha'u'llah had access to an amanuensis at this point. So the draft may have been in his own hand. But this anyway is a fair copy in the hand of a professional scribe. And as it happens, on this fair copy, Baha'u'llah has written in his own hand a little sort of note explaining the circumstances of the revelation of this text. So it's tough to read it's hard for me to read his hand, but the translation of it, I can read the first part of it. In resale dar javabe so'ali neveshte shod. This treatise was written in reply to a seeker who had asked how the promised Mahdi could have become transformed or changed into Ali Muhammad, the Bab. The opportunity provided by this question was seized to elaborate on a number of subjects, all of which are of use and benefit both to them that seek and to those who have attained, could ye perceive with the eye of divine virtue. So that's Baha'u'llah's introductory note to it. So the question is, how could this promised Mahdi, also called Mahdi, you hear it sit in the news. You often, if you hear it on newscasts or something, you might hear about the Mahdi, this great promised figure, both in Sunni and Shiite Islam, although it's not emphasized as much in Sunni Islam as it is in Shia Islam. There's this idea of a promised one. The promised one is not thought to be another prophet of the stature of Muhammad, very significantly, because Muhammad is believed to have been the seal of the prophets, as Muhammad himself says in the Quran, the seal of the prophets, which is almost universally understood by Muslims to mean the final prophet. And that's the whole problem, part of this problem that Baha'u'llah has to solve. The problem of religious diversity caused by every religious community that arises says, well, ours is somehow special. In the case of Islam, ours is so special that it was so perfect that God doesn't need to do anymore. Finished. Broke the pen when he finished the Quran, and that's it. And so broke the quill. So there's still this idea of a Mahdi coming, whether you're Shia or Sunni, and this Mahdi, I'm not qualified to speak in any detail as to sort of the details of it, but just it's supposed to be a figure who will restore Islam to its former greatness. That there'll be a period of time maybe when Islam will have been partially eclipsed in the world, and there'll be a restoration. And so there is.
And that's in the Quran?
No, that's not in the Quran. That would be in the Hadith. Yeah. So there's, it's not the idea of a promised one coming after Muhammad is not explicitly anywhere in the Quran, but the Hadith are this vast ocean of hearsay writings, what we would call pilgrim notes, volume after volume. Many times the volume of the Quran in terms of size, and differentiated by isnad, or by the sort of the chain of authorities which the experts in hadith science sort of argue amongst themselves. Which are the most sort of reliable chains of authorities that we can attach to these different hadith, these different sayings of the prophets, that give us greater confidence that this is actually a reliable saying of Muhammad. So there's a whole, people spend their whole lives, immersed in this sort of science of hadith and arguing about which ones are most reliable. Baha'u'llah quotes many of these hadith in his own writings, and the idea, some of these ideas, like the idea of the Mahdi or Mehdi, and this is also partly a difference in pronunciation between Persians and, because the short vowels aren't printed, and so you can kind of read it either way. And if you're Arab, you'll probably read it as Mahdi, and if you're Persian, you'll probably read it as Mehdi. It's the same word, but it means the one who's, it indicates the one who's promised. So the cause for the writing of the Gems of Divine Mysteries was just like the uncle of the Bab writes, a year later or 2 years later to Baha'u'llah. This Sayyid Yosef Esefti Esfahani says, well, how can this promised one that we're expecting, who has all of these attributes that we're expecting, how could the Bab have come and say, hey, I'm this promised one, but he's not fulfilling the necessary, in their mind, all the necessary prerequisites. And it's exactly the same problem with when Jesus came and the Jews said, but you're not sitting on the throne of David, you're supposed to be sitting on the throne of David. And
it came on a donkey.
Yeah.
So it didn't come the way they expected, and that was a great veil to recognizing the spiritual truth of the mission of Jesus, that his sovereignty was not of this world. Yeah. That was the big thing. And Baha'u'llah addresses exactly the same question in the Kitab-i-Iqan. Part 2 of the Kitab-i-Iqan, most of it is this question of sovereignty, and the idea that the prophet has a sovereignty which is not of this world. Even if not a soul recognizes it, that sovereignty is still there. So same problem, and the solution, as Baha'u'llah outlines, is here in Gems of Divine Mysteries. At least the sort of his first iteration of describing the solution.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah.
Why were people sending or requesting questions be answered by Baha'u'llah before he even declared?
So that's a great question, because Baha'u'llah was, if this was a couple years before the Kitab-i-Iqan, it would have been late 1850s. And just, the context of this is the Bab declares his mission in 1844, is martyred in 1850. There's this period of massive persecution of the Babis, which nearly extinguishes this new faith in Persia. Thousands of Babis put to the sword in various gruesome ways, martyred. And during this period of time, following 1850, when the Babi community gradually basically goes underground or in exile, those few Babis who remain, of which Baha'u'llah was one, a declared follower of the Bab. He was thrown into prison a couple of years after a year or two after the martyrdom of the Bab, because some of the Babis, sort of crazed by the martyrdom of the Bab, took it into their own hands to assassinate the Shah. Attempted to assassinate the Shah. It was poorly conceived and poorly executed. Obviously, they brought along birdshot or something like that. It was just they were out of their minds. But the Persian authorities took this as a pretext for sort of a massive pogrom against the Babis. And so this was in the 1850s. And Baha'u'llah was caught up in this pogrom and was thrown into this notorious prison in Tehran called the Siyah Chal, or the Black Pit, where he spent several months. And it was in this black pit that he received, as he describes it, this first intimation of his divine mission. Although when exactly he was aware of his own status is a bit of an open question, although it's clear that some major event happened in the Siyah Chal. Abdu'l-Baha, in some Answer Questions later, tells us that the prophet is always the prophet, and they always had some awareness of their station, even from early childhood. It's a question we'll never really have an answer to, but partly as a consequence of this, there is, as with Jesus, stories have sort of arisen as to how remarkable they were as children. We find some of these in the Gospels. There's some of these attributed to Muhammad in the Hadith, though not in the Quran. And there's some of these also attributed to Baha'u'llah and the Bab.
And Moses, too.
And Moses as well as a child.
Yeah, as a child.
Oh, of course. There's that whole story of of being put in the basket with the bulrushes, and so there's a.
And he was the only one that was literate. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's kind of these special origin stories for all the prophets that how would anyone have known? Who was there writing it down, recording this, decades before anyone had a clue as to who they are. I don't know, a skeptical scholar would read all this and say, this is clearly blank.
It's so obvious.
Some stuff has been generously filled in by later, by the pious, followers of a later time. I guess we kind of have to leave it there and realize that these stories are part of the narrative around the prophet that helps to highlight how special they were, and in that sense, that's part of the story of the prophet. These are very, very special beings. Baha'u'llah's own prophethood was, as he describes, sort of revealed to him in sort of in its fullness in this event in the Siyah Chal around 1851-ish. And he was subsequently, when he was released from the Siyah Chal, he was subsequently exiled from Tehran to Baghdad. So it was the first of a series of exiles that would land him finally in Akka, in the Holy Land, in 1868. And so this period between 1852 or 1853 when he was exiled from Persia to 1868, there's this 15-year period when Baha'u'llah is sort of living sort of a semi-itinerant existence at times. Sometimes, he always had a place to live. Sometimes he was on the road being exiled to the next place, from Baghdad to Constantinople or Istanbul, then Adrianople, and then finally Akka. They were given a sort of a minimal government pension because during this time they were part of the all of these places were part of the Ottoman Empire. So although they were considered prisoners, they weren't free to move about. They were given a kind of subsistence. They were given enough money to subsist on, and that allowed them to survive at some basic level. But then those around Baha'u'llah sort of took on extra jobs and things to bring in extra income so that they could support themselves. And it wasn't until later in the Akka years that more and more of the believers in Baha'u'llah, as his message gradually became more widespread, people started sending donations in. And so during the final years of Baha'u'llah's life, he lived in relative physical comfort. But during this time, during the revelation of Gems of Divine Mysteries, he lived in Baghdad. It would have been a pretty, fairly, I wouldn't say, very basic existence because he's still coming from wealth. He had to leave most of his wealth behind when he was exiled. But the house that he lived in Baghdad was Baha'u'llah extols this house, and he writes about this house in the years following as a place of pilgrimage for Baha'is in the future. And the Baha'is had control of this house until I think the 1920s or something, and then they lost control of it. And since then, it's been torn down, I think. But detailed plans exist for it to be rebuilt at some point, at which point it'll be a place of pilgrimage for Baha'is. I mention that because it's part of the context of the revelation of Gems of Divine Mysteries. That Baha'u'llah here is a known follower of the Bab, a known Babi, and a kind of not the leader of the Babi community, because the nominal leader of the Babi community at this time was Baha'u'llah's own half-brother, Mirza Yahya, which is its own kind of side story. Mirza Yahya was also a Babi, younger than Baha'u'llah, and was the designated appointee of the Bab when the Bab was martyred. But as it's described by Baha'u'llah, that appointment was made in fact to protect Baha'u'llah, and Mirza Yahya was sort of then the public face, but Baha'u'llah was the real kind of spiritual leadership behind the Babi community at this time. And Mirza Yahya, although he was the kind of the public face or the formal leader of the Babi community, he spent most of his time sort of undercover, kind of fearfully in fear of his own life. Anyway, the details of that take us a little bit far afield from the content of Gems of Divine Mysteries. But also relevant to the context of Gems of Divine Mysteries is that Baha'u'llah at this point had not yet declared his own mission. So that wasn't to come until 1863, and this book was written in the late 1850s. If I were to guess, it would probably be something like 1859 or something like that, right around there, plus or minus a year or two. So his own declaration was a little ways off. The Kitab-i-Gan likewise was revealed by Baha'u'llah before his declaration, but that was revealed a year or two after this, and a year or two before his declaration, let's say in 1861-ish. I think scholars might have zeroed in on the exact year, but it's 1861 plus or minus a year, I think. And there's already a difference between Gems of Divine Mysteries and the Kitab-i-Gan, in the sense that if you read the Kitab-i-Gan with the benefit of hindsight, you see that Baha'u'llah is dropping hints all throughout the Kitab-i-Gan as to his own station. That he is speaking through a kind of divine inspiration, which he becomes more and more explicit about. So explicit that by the end of the Kitab-i-Gan, he signs off, revealed by the B and the H, identifying it as a work of revelation. But if you look through Gems of Divine Mysteries, you won't find, I think, and maybe I've missed it, but I don't think you'll find any intimations of this future declaration of Baha'u'llah. It's still a completely guarded secret. Although, as we know from Baha'u'llah's own words, he's known for several years where this is heading, but he hasn't yet started to make it clear to those around him. So Baha'u'llah in this book then is addressing this principal problem of the diversity of religions in the world, and he proposes the solution to it. And the solution, as we'll see, that divine revelation is continuous and progressive and never final, and always adapted to local circumstances, to the sort of time and place. It is, one way to think of it is, it's God's conversation with humanity as it unfolds throughout history. And because humanity is always growing and changing and evolving, then the nature of that conversation grows and changes and evolves. One can say that, although it's oversimplistic to say that humanity grows and evolves just like its individual members, it has a childhood, it has adolescence, it has a maturity. Although it's not a straight line. You find some revelations in some ways are less advanced than earlier revelations. This was Abdu'l-Baha says, although this is perhaps somewhat of a delicate point, Abdu'l-Baha says that this was the case between Christianity and Islam, that there's some ways in which in which Christianity surpasses Islam, even though Islam came later chronologically. But that doesn't have anything to do with the intrinsic divinity of either revelation. It has everything to do with the circumstances and limitations of those people to whom these messages came. And so that's part of the solution then to the problem of religious diversity, is to recognize the differences, which are there to be seen. You can't simply ignore the differences, but you have to be able to understand those differences within some larger picture that allows the differences to exist, makes it sort of rational and reasonable to see these differences, but also at the same time looks behind these differences to see the unity that lies underneath. And so Baha'u'llah, as we'll see, addresses this problem in the pages of Gems of Divine Mysteries.
Christina asked the question of why the letter, the question was sent to Baha'u'llah at this time. So is the answer to that?
I never really answered. I went on this long digression.
I'm
just sorry about that.
I thought you did, but okay.
Yeah, it's because Baha'u'llah was, although he wasn't the leader of the Babis officially, he was kind of the soul of the Babi community at this time, and people knew that. So people who wanted to ask.
He was fairly educated, right? And people did go to him for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, who knows? Maybe this person, maybe Yosef Sethi Isfahani asked me, I had the same question.
Yeah.
And maybe he was like, well, which one is going to give me the better answer?
Let's see that. Comparing the response.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Look at his handwriting.
Maybe he asked a lot of people.
Yeah. So part of the problematic, part of the challenge of the diversity of religions is that the continuity between religions is hidden. It's not obvious. It's something below the surface. If you just look at the surface, you see apparently irreconcilable differences, both in terms of who you can marry, what you can eat, those sorts of social laws and customs. And you can say, well, that's easily explained because they're adapted to time and place and culture and so forth. But it goes beyond that. I mean, the surface level differences are not just in terms of manner of dress and diet and so forth. It also touches on matters of theology, and the theologies are not all the same. I mean, look at the theology that's embedded in the Buddhist and Hindu texts, which the Baha'i faith embraces as part of the divine story of the human race. And the theologies of those Eastern religions are quite different than the Judeo-Christian Islamic, theology, which is the heritage of the West. And within that heritage of the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, despite their differences on a surface level, kind of share more in common than they differ. I mean, they share a common conception of a deity who wants to be known, who created the world, who sends prophets. The prophets have books. The books have laws. Out of this, the community rises. In that sense, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith are very, very much sort of close cousins, if not brother, sister. And so part of the problem that Baha'u'llah never really explicitly deals with, but it's implicitly there in Baha'u'llah's writings. Part of the problem is, well, how do you look at Buddhism and Hinduism and bring this into this conception of the unity of religion, which is much easier to do if you confine your view to just the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. But once you start looking at Hinduism and Buddhism, you have to address the fact that, well, the theologies are totally different too. For example, there's no positive conception of a deity at all in Buddhism. And Hinduism is arguably polytheistic. Although when you look at the Vedas, there's clearly, I think, a monotheistic core behind it. But you have ideas of reincarnation and so forth, which are not present in the Western conceptions. And here, I think one can basically apply that the same reasoning that one applies to the social teachings, that even the theologies are functions of time and place, because because neither the theologies nor the social teachings are the heart of the matter. Both of those, we think, the theology is the heart of the matter, and the social teachings are the outer garb. But the heart of the matter goes deeper than the theology, and obviously deeper than the social teachings. The heart of the matter is something about divine transcendence and love, and a particular posture that we're called to take on in the world in relationship to the divine and in relationship to others. And I think that's where the true heart is, that you find no difference between, say, Buddhism and Islam on that. But that requires us to let go a little bit of what I think people have long believed, which is that our way of thinking about God is the right way, and your way of thinking about God is the wrong way. Right. And that's what Baha'u'llah deals with, implicitly in Gems of Divine Mysteries and also in the Kitab-i-Iqan. And the way he deals with it is so interesting. He deals with it in the context of talking about the mystical path. And Gems of Divine Mysteries has a section where he talks about the stages of the seeker, just like the Seven Valleys does, actually. In a way, Gems of Divine Mysteries is kind of a cross between the Seven Valleys and the Kitab-i-Iqan, because the first chunk of it, the first section, reads just like the Kitab-i-Iqan, including analyzing the same passage from the Bible that he analyzes the Kitab-i-Iqan, whereas the second half of Gems of Divine Mysteries looks a whole lot like the Seven Valleys. Which is the stages of the seven stages of this that the seeker traverses, from the stages of search to the stage of utter annihilation of the soul, of true poverty and absolute nothingness. So why does Baha'u'llah put together stages of the seeker, this mystical text, which you think is very much on the level of our individual relationship to God, the individual path of the individual spiritual path, and he merges it in this little text with this sort of here's how to talk about Scripture, here's how to interpret Scripture, here's how to look at the verses of the Bible and prophecies of the Bible in relation to Islam. Why does he sort of take these two as two components of a single answer? And I think the answer is that Baha'u'llah, in describing the stages, is not just describing the stages that a single seeker traverses throughout, say, the course of their life or the course of their spiritual journey, but rather he's describing with each valley a different kind of seeker. And in Gems of Divine Mysteries, more than even in the Seven Valleys, he says that each of these valleys, within each of these valleys, the seeker's viewpoints are equally correct, even though they differ completely from each other. And we'll see this about halfway through. He says, the seekers in this valley consider the seekers in this other valley as idolaters, and the ones in that other valley consider the seekers in the first valley as impious. Yeah. And he says, and that's just the way it is, because unless you're one seeker going through these valleys, and then you have a kind of three-dimensional perspective, and you can say, oh yeah, I was once in this valley, and then I was in this valley, and I can sort of see how you can look at it from these different ways. Not all of humanity progresses in that way. And I think Baha'u'llah realized this. He realized that some people will always be within a certain framework. They'll always look at the world through a certain framework. And that's okay, Baha'u'llah wants to say. That's okay, as long as it's not a source of contention and hatred and conflict. And how can it be made okay? It can be made okay through what Baha'u'llah is suggesting, through the idea that all of them are equally valid and part of an unfolding plan for humanity. They're connected historically, but they are part of an ongoing conversation with God. And it may be that one comes later than the other. It may be that some are, in some objective ways, maybe more advanced than others, but maybe that doesn't take away from the truth of the earlier stages either.
And I wonder even if they're all maybe necessary.
And maybe all are
Maybe
necessary.
we go so as far as to say we kind of need that diversity.
We kind of do, yeah.
Like if you only have one type of seeker, maybe all of the seekers bring something to the table that helps to create a synergy.
Certainly the humanity that we're faced with, the world that we live in is a world in which there is incredible diversity among all living things, and including human beings and human cultures. And through whatever accidents of history, for example, certain tribes of humanity have been separated from other tribes of humanity for tens of thousands of years, and only in recent times has there been a coming together again. And so naturally there's incredible diversity because of this incredibly different pasts and histories that the different tribes of humanity have gone through. And so the answers are here in Gems of Divine Mysteries. So that's sort of the initial sales job, to keep going and pushing through the difficult bits.
And had the Seven Valleys already been written at this time, or where does that fall? Because it's in that period.
It's not clear because we don't know the date. We don't know the date.
But we do know that it was the Baghdad period.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would have been within a few years of this. My guess is that Gems of Divine Mysteries came relatively soon before the Egon, just because they're so similar.
Before the Egon.
But what about Seven Valleys?
But Seven Valleys, I think, probably came before Gems of Divine Mysteries. That's my guess, and I don't have a good reason to say that.
When was Baha'u'llah in Suleymaniye?
So he was in Suleymaniye not long after he first arrived in Baghdad, and this would have been 1853. He saw the state of the Babi community. He was very disheartened. He saw the disunity. He saw the sort of low spirit of the community, and he said, "I'm out of here." So
Do you think
he
he
left.
might have written the Seven Valleys during that time, being with all of the dervishes?
That's a good question too. I mean, whether it was written during the time of his, he sort of spent, like Jesus spent his 40 days in the wilderness, and Muhammad went to the cave, and most like all the prophets have had this sort of period of retirement. So Baha'u'llah's period of retirement was 2 years long, and it began soon after he arrived in Baghdad. He left his family behind, he left his children behind, his wife behind, and he took up the bowl, the alms bowl, and clothing of the dervish, and he went off into the mountains of Kurdistan and lived as a dervish. But he was still very active.
He took on another name.
Took on Darwish Muhammad was his name. And he revealed poetry. So a lot of poems of Baha'u'llah date to this period. And he became known, word spread, that in the mountains there's this great, mystic and an alchemist, and answer all your questions, magical things attributed to Baha'u'llah. So people would seek him out and ask him, what's the secret of alchemy? And so he's written tablets where he describes the alchemical process in very allegorical terms, right? Because he's trying to lead them to the truth. And to others, poetry would be revealed, some very long odes that were dated to this period. The Seven Valleys, I don't know if it was this period or if it was after his return. But his return would have been, let's say, 1855-ish, which would have given a good 8-year period before his declaration in 1863. And that 8-year period was really quite prolific.
Hidden words too, right?
The hidden words, the Kitab-i-Gan, the Seven Valleys are respectively his primary ethical work, his primary doctrinal work, and his primary mystical work, according to Shoghi Effendi. So really the pillars of his revelation, the sort of initial impetus, and the sort of, in a way, the strongest explication of sort of the core ideas of his ministry were all made during this period in Baghdad, before he even told anyone that he's the promised one. So after his declaration in 1863, the content and sort of thrust of his revelation really changed. It became less mystical. It's hard to find any mystical tablets written after this time, although there's mystical elements in all of his writings, but a sort of very explicit mystical kind of theme like you find in the second half of Gems. kind of drops off after the Baghdad period. But he himself said that he initially addressed himself to the mystics, and then to the clergy, and then to the kings and rulers, which is very interesting because that maps really neatly onto what his actual ministry looks like. So in the first 10 years, very mystical, and then in the next several years, it was particularly to the followers of the Bab, sort of cementing his status as divine revelator, explaining his relationship to the Bab, convincing the entire remaining followers of the Bab to follow him. So in that sense, it was taken up more, I guess, more theologically in that sense. And then the last portion of Baha'u'llah's ministry, which was the Akka portion, 1868 to 1892, was more addressed to kings and rulers. His announcement to Napoleon, and to the Pope and Queen Victoria and others was during that time, his proclamation tablets, but also his later tablets that explain in more kind of didactic form what the principles, the sort of political principles, if you will, of his revelation are. That there should be houses of justice that are elected, that have power to legislate. That agriculture should be a major concern of governments of the future, and he mentions the importance of the newspapers. So relevant to today. But Baha'u'llah was very concerned at that time, in the late 1800s, about the power of the press to distort reality. He was one of the, I guess, one of the first victims, in a way, of the distorting lens that the press can cast truths through, because he was not covered very sympathetically in the Arab press of the time, and since he was living in the Holy Land, it would have been Arab, not Persian language, but like Arabic language presses in Egypt, that primarily would have covered events in the Holy Land. And so whenever Baha'u'llah or his faith was mentioned, it was usually with some degree of distortion. So these sorts of things take up more of Baha'u'llah's bandwidth in the later years of his ministry, and you don't see as much of these mystical themes. So with all of that as introduction, we were going to look at the first 16 paragraphs. I have as for what it's worth, as potentially helpful guide for. I'll use this as I walk through, and you can use it if you find it useful. But I made an outline of the book as I understand it. And basically it breaks into three main areas. The first, which we'll look at tonight, is discussing the understanding of sacred scriptures, particularly when the scriptures kind of act as their own veil in a way. Their hiddenness is a veil to their own truth. This is also a major topic of part 1 of the Kitab Yugan. In part 2, he gives the keys to the correct interpretation of scripture, which again we'll find are highly correlated to the Kitab Yugan. And in that column on the right, under cross-references, I've put these are the paragraph numbers in the Kitab Yugan, where you can read this area and then go to the Kitab Yugan and look at that paragraph and see where he says almost the same thing in the Kitab Yugan. And so the content and even the sequence,
And these are the paragraph
sequence.
numbers.
These are the paragraph numbers for the Kitab Yugan. Then in the next page, in part 3, it switches over and it becomes kind of like a mini Seven Valleys. And we get the stations in the Wayfarer's Journey. And the order is slightly different, but overall the content is the same. And here you still see a lot of cross-references to the Kitab Yugan, but then you see SVs, which are cross-references to the Seven Valleys. And these, unfortunately, are page numbers of the edition which I had at the time. Nowadays, the Seven Valleys is found in print, bundled with a few other tablets in a little volume that looks just like this. It's with a green cover called The Call of the Divine Beloved. Seven Valleys is in there as Yeah, as well as the 4 valleys, as well as a few other mystical tablets that were more recently translated. And so that is that goes on until the end of this book, where he, interestingly, instead of stopping at the same valley that the 7 valleys stops at, he goes 2 more valleys. So very helpful, for us to think that, this is some crystallized, this is the way it goes. It's like, no.
And then you're there, right?
Right.
No.
It's not how it works. It's like, depending on time, place.
If you think you're in a valley, go back to 0.
Go back to 0. And he says that at the end. He says, if you think you're in the valley, go back to the beginning. He says, if you think you've made it to the end, and you become filled with pride because of your achievement,
It's like the little
he says you'll go back to the beginning without realizing it. So we'll see that at the end.
And if he's got 2 extra valleys, 9 is a very good number.
9 is a great number, yeah. But he takes out, I think, 1, and so I think we're down to 8. But if you merge the 7 valleys and Gems of Mysteries, you get 9. But then at the end he says, I've left out these other valleys. I didn't have time to talk about them. So if you add those others in, then maybe you're back up to 11. I don't know.
It's kind of like the paradises, right?
Yeah.
There's all these different levels of heaven or something. It's like
Yeah. There's a number. So there's a number of different tablets which take some complex theological theme and break it into a bunch of stages. So you've got valleys, you've got different levels of paradise. You have Abdu'l-Baha, where he talks about stages of the soul, and he gives 14 different stages. He starts from like the mineral, the soul of the stones, and then there's the soul of the vegetables, and there's the soul of the animals, and the soul of the humans, and then he goes on, and there's this imperfect soul, and then there's the self-blaming soul, and then there's the accepted soul, and then there's the approved soul, and then there's the soul of the, and then there's the perfect soul, and then there's the soul of the kingdom, and then there's the soul of the dominion, and then there's the soul of the empyrean heaven, and then and it just goes on, and you count it, it's like, gosh, there's 14 different stages here. But I think in all of these cases, one is forced not to look at it as some sort of fixed hierarchy, because elsewhere it'll always be described differently. And so you realize that all of these structures shouldn't be seen as, here's information that's being conveyed. Like here are the as if it were some scientific treatise, like here are the equations for gravity or whatever. It's not information in that sense, but it's inspiration, which is, for the moment, clothed in the garment of words that always fits time and place and recipient. And I think one should always look behind the structure to the heart of what's beneath it, which is enlivening the soul and drawing the soul closer to the Creator. And if that's done in one place by going through 7 valleys, and another place by going through 8 valleys, then that's it just helps. It helps detach us from thinking about this in structural terms, and always trying to look at the kind of the spirit of it that's always underneath. So
I think that's really hard. I feel like, at least from my background, it's like I want it to be like a math book, I want to know, what's the formula, so and I can try to apply the formula and get the solution. And so it's hard sometimes to get out of that.
That's why I did it for you.
There is the formula of the day he returns in the Bible.
Yes.
Use that one.
Yeah, but based on the translation.
Right. But when it comes to just these spiritual principles, your tolerance for ambiguity has to increase.
And I think one has to avoid the temptation to think of religion as some kind of systematized knowledge. There's a practice involved. There's in the case of the Baha'i faith, there's an administrative order that's part of the plan that's meant to transform humanity and lead humanity to the next stage of its evolution. But to think of, I think, the Baha'i writings as some sort of delivery of systematized knowledge, I think, would miss the heart of what's really going on, which is the same thing that's going on in all the other religions past that people also misread as being some kind of systematized knowledge. And where did that lead us trying to read out the Bible as systematized knowledge? It leads to creation science. It leads to a kind of overly literal interpretation of these words, which were given thousands of years ago in a very alien context, and to try to sort of shoehorn it into our modern scientific understanding of the world, and it just doesn't work.
Can I raise something about that? Just the meaning, the spiritual meaning of words. In some of the prayers that we pray in the morning, I have this impression, I don't know that I can point to anything, probably that's a good thing, but the notion that when a word revealed by God comes into you, it has a work that it is actually doing that's transformative, that is enlarging, it's illuminating, and so on. And it's almost as if the word itself is like a husk, and there's something inside it. And the word is sort of the way God gets something he wants to get to you, into you. And so just kind of reflecting on this, I studied theology till the cows come home, and Christianity and all of this. And all of this misuse of words, where you take logical structures that are supposed to capture that which is in the husk, rather than use the husk to free what's in its center, is just so misleading, and it leads to so much division. You got how many
So true.
gazillion
And then there's division among the
denominations.
churches. The denominations are based on
for
an
that
interpretation.
reason. Exactly.
Yeah, so like their version of, they use the new version of the translation, or the King James version, and it all depends on your translation. Yeah.
And I guess the question I would have for you, Stephen, around this is, when you say things like, all of these words have historical, geographical conditioning elements to them that shape the lives of the people who are hearing it, but they are being shaped to see it as eternal. So it's sort of does not compute quality, and yet those words are the avenue that all of the prophets have taken to bring God to us. So I'm just
It's the poison and the cure.
All they have are words, and we almost inevitably take the words and crystallize them in ways that ossify them, and they become less capable of being the channel through which the grace flows, because the whole idea is that the words are like the channel of grace. One of my favorite prayers, which I can't quote only beyond the first phrase, but maybe one of you can. I am, oh my Lord, but a tiny seed. That's such a profound thing, right? Because we're the seed, and what's the water, It's the words are like the water that revives and causes the seed to sprout and fulfill its potentiality. The water and the heat of the sun and the breeze. Well, those are the four elements right there, actually: air, earth, fire, and water. But if the human reality as seed helps us think about the word, the revealed word, as something dynamic and life-giving, something that flows through us rather than some kind of structured package that's of truth. There's another beautiful way of thinking about this is was quoted by, it's a great story behind this actually, because it involves all three central figures of the Baha'i faith. So Abdu'l-Baha narrates the story of this fellow by the name of his name isn't actually that crucial. I think it's Ustad Ismail. And so Abdu'l-Baha recites the story of Ustad Ismail, who was pining away for Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah says to him, "Come and visit me in Akka." And as you're journeying to Akka, he says, "Turn your face towards the Bab and sing these following words set to a melody." So Abdu'l-Baha is writing the story of Ustad Ismail, who's going to visit Baha'u'llah. And Baha'u'llah says, on your way, recite this, which is a poem of Rumi, by the way. And recite it to the Bab as you're visiting me. So it's a great kind of melange of all the central figures with Rumi thrown in for good effect. But it gives you this idea of what the relationship between us and and the divinity is, which is this living thing that flows through us. It'll speak for itself. I am lost, O love, possessed and dazed. Love's fool am I in all the earth. They call me first among the crazed, though I once came first for wit and worth. O love, who sellest me this wine. O love, for whom I burn and bleed. Love, for whom I cry and pine. Thou the piper, I the reed. If thou wishest me to live, through me blow thy holy breath. The touch of Jesus thou wilt give to me, who've lain in age and death. Thou both end and origin, thou without and thou within. From every eye thou hidest well, and yet in every eye dost dwell. I love the evocation of, Jesus raising the dead, but also, identifying God as, the first and the last, the beginning, the internal and the inner and the outer, and the hidden and the manifest, sort of those three pairings. And so often we think of God as, something manifest, something that exists in time, something delivers words in the form of information. But then there's this other side of God, the hidden side, the thing that's within, the thing that's internal, the thing that's the piper, and we're the reed. And that's such a different kind of way of thinking about the reality of the word and the word's effect on us. It's like a song that's or a breath that's blown through us. So why don't we start, and maybe we can go around and read, each person take a paragraph sort of thing, and then
Starting
pause.
with Jim's.
Starting with, He is the exalted, the Most High.
All right. Shall I begin?
Please.
He is the exalted, the Most High. O thou who treadeth the path of justice, and beholdeth the countenance of mercy. Thine epistle was received, thy question was noted, and the sweet accents of thy soul were heard from the inmost chambers of thy heart. Whereupon the clouds of the divine will were raised to rain upon thee the outpourings of heavenly wisdom, to divest thee of all that thou hast acquired aforetime, to draw thee from the realms of contradiction unto the retreats of oneness, and to lead thee to the sacred streams of his law. Perchance thou mayest quaff therefrom, repose therein, quench thy thirst, refresh thy soul, and be numbered with those whom the light of God hath guided aright in this day.
Encompassed as I am at this time by the dogs of the earth and the beasts of every land, concealed as I remain in the hidden habitation of mine inner being, forbidden as I may be from divulging that which God hath bestowed upon me on the wonders of his knowledge, the gems of his wisdom and the tokens of his power, yet I am loath to frustrate the hopes of one who has approached the sanctuary of grandeur, sought to enter within the precincts of eternity, and aspire to soar in the immensity of his creation at the dawning of the divine decree. I shall therefore relate unto thee certain truths from among those which God hath vouchsafed unto me. This only to the extent that the souls can bear and minds endure, lest the malicious raise a clamor, or the dissemblers hoist their banners. I implore God to graciously aid me in this. For unto such as beseech him, he is all bounteous, and of those who show mercy, he is the most merciful.
Maybe this is a kind of veiled
I was gonna
declaration
say,
of
maybe there is
station.
more
There's a little bit of
here.
that.
What do you mean? Which part?
He says
That
from
he's gonna before he declares, he's saying, I know these things, but I'm forbidden to tell them, and that God has vouchsafed these things to me, and I'm going to share them.
I was surprised when you said he hadn't declared it, because when I was reading it, I was totally seeing him talking about.
I've forgotten about this actually.
Yeah, because I was like, he had to be after it.
Yeah.
I also felt like and this only to the extent that souls can bear and minds endure. Sometimes I feel like that's why maybe he uses things like valleys, because that is what our brains can comprehend. But like we were saying, don't think that's it.
Yeah.
I'm doing this for you, because you need like valleys, you need like metaphors and things that you can make concrete, because that's the way our brains work evolutionarily.
Yeah.
But that's not it.
Yeah.
It also says that in the tablet of Baha'u'llah, somebody was asking him why is he speaking in Arabic when he should be speaking in Farsi or writing in Farsi, and he basically said, I'm doing it for the reader, for the audience.
Yeah.
I'm responding in the language that they responded to me in.
Yeah.
I know then that it behooveth thine eminence to ponder from the outset these questions in thy heart. What hath prompted the diverse peoples and kindreds of the earth to reject the apostles whom God hath sent unto them in his might and power, whom he hath raised up to exalt his cause and ordained to be the lamps of eternity within the niche of his oneness? For what reason have the people turned aside from them, disputed about them, risen against and contended with them? On what grounds have they refused to acknowledge their apostleship and authority, nay, denied their truth and revealed their persons, even slaying or banishing them? Reviled their persons, even slaying or banishing them.
So this is exactly how the Yugon starts.
Yeah.
Asking, and he asks as a form of a question. Repeats
What's up?
asking questions. Yeah.
O thou who hast set foot in the wilderness of knowledge, and taken abode within the ark of wisdom, not until thou hast grasped the mysteries concealed in that which we shall relate unto thee, canst thou hope to attain to the station of faith and certitude in the cause of God, and in those who are the manifestations of his cause, the daysprings of his command, the treasuries of his revelation, and the repositories of his knowledge. Shouldst thou fail in this, thou wouldst be numbered with them that have not striven for the cause of God, nor inhaled the fragrance of faith from the raiment of certitude, nor scaled the heights of the divine unity, nor yet recognized the stations of divine singleness within the embodiments of praise and the essences of sanctity.
Strive then, O my brother, to apprehend this matter, that the veils may be lifted from the face of thy heart, and that thou mayest be reckoned among them whom God hath graced with such penetrating vision as to behold the most subtle realities of his dominion, to fathom the mysteries of his kingdom, to perceive the signs of his transcendent essence in this mortal world, and to attain a station wherein one seeth no distinction amongst his creatures, and findeth no flaw in the creation of the heavens and the earth.
Wow.
That's a great one. Do you take that to mean like just don't judge anybody else? Don't worry about anyone else. That's kind of
Don't look for the flaws.
yeah.
And it also sounds a bit like this valley of unity, which is coming up. This not seeing any distinction amongst his creatures, promising that I'll get you to this point of transcending the various valleys of distinction and to take you where everything is one.
Now that the discourse has reached this exalted and intractable theme and touched upon this sublime and impenetrable mystery, know that the Christian and Jewish peoples have not grasped the intent of the words of God and the promises he hath made to them in his book, and have therefore denied his cause, turned aside from his prophets, and rejected his proofs. Had they but fixed their gaze upon the testimony of God itself, had they refused to follow in the footsteps of the abject and foolish among their leaders and divines, they would doubtless have attained to the repository of guidance and the treasury of virtue, and quaffed from the crystal waters of life eternal in the city of the all-merciful, in the garden of the all-glorious, and within the inner reality of his paradise. But as they have refused to see with the eyes wherewith God hath endowed them, and desired things other than that which he in his mercy had desired for them, they have strayed far from the retreats of nearness, having deprived of the living waters of reunion and the wellspring of his grace, and have lain as dead within the shrouds of their own selves.
Oh. I'm puzzled by this phrase, they have refused to see with the eyes wherewith God hath endowed them. I mean, it almost sounds
The
like,
inner
when
eye.
I think of that, the hidden words, see no evil. And at some level, there's a moral choice around how you see. So if God has endowed you with the capacity to see, I guess what he means is that you're choosing not to use the eyes God has given you in the way that you have been enabled to see. So it's a moral choice there.
And you've given over your moral choice to the abject and foolish among the leaders and divines, which also is a major theme of the Kitab Yagam in part 1. He singles out the clergy in every age and dispensation as being a veil, because they hold power. They come to hold temporal power, and that's a great temptation away from opening your eyes to a truth which may remove that power from you.
Wow. Through the power of God and his might, I shall now relate certain passages revealed by the books of old, and mention some of the signs heralding the appearance of the manifestations of God in the sanctified persons of his chosen ones, that thou mayest recognize the dayspring of this everlasting Lord, and behold this fire that blazeth in the tree, which is neither of the east nor of the west. Perchance thine eyes may be opened upon attaining the presence of thy Lord, and thy heart partake in the blessings concealed within these hidden treasures. Render thanks, then, unto God, who hath singled thee out for this grace, and who hath numbered thee with them that are assured of meeting their Lord. Wow.
This fire, which is neither of the east nor the west, always has spoken to me as perhaps suggesting that Baha'u'llah's concept of, divine revelation, goes beyond, even though he only talks about Christianity and Islam and the Old Testament specifically. He never quotes from the Vedas or from or from the Dhammapada or anything like that. But he does say this is a fire which is neither of the east nor the west. So it is, it's for the east as well. And it's a new kind of theological framework that embraces both.
But this is a quote from the Quran, it says. Does anybody know?
This fire which is neither of the east nor the west.
That blazeth in the tree which is neither of the east nor of the west. The footnote says that that's a quote from the Quran.
But is it referring to Moses and the burning bush or no?
No, it's from a very famous passage in the Quran called the tablet of the verse, called the verse of light. If you want, I can recite it for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want. It goes, Allahu nur as-samawati wal-ard, mathala nurihi kamishkatin fiha al-misbah, am-misbahu fi zujaja, az-zujajatu ka'annaka kawkabun durriyun yuqad min shajaratin mubarakatin zaytuna, زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار نور على نور يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس Wallahu ala kulli shay'in alim. So it says God is the light of the heavens and the earth. His utterance is like a lamp, the lamp encased in a glass, the glass lit as through 1,000 stars, fed by an oil, an olive tree, which is neither of the east nor of the west. And then verily God setteth forth parables for you. That's a really rough translation, but it's one of the most famous passages in the Quran, and one of the most very mystically kind of evocative about the reality of the of the revelation being this this oil that lights this flame, but the oil is this olive tree which is neither of the east nor the west. That's the kind of the key bit of context that may be helpful.
Would that have been the word of Muhammad? And what would he have meant by the east?
Yeah. What did he mean by neither of the east nor the west? In one of the hadith, Muhammad says, "Seek knowledge even unto China." So China was known even to the Arabs of the peninsula of that time. And the West for them would have been Rum. It would have been Rome, or the Roman Empire would have been like the furthermost, as far as their knowledge had gone. This is the text of that which was revealed aforetime in the first gospel, according to Matthew, regarding the signs that must needs herald the advent of the one who shall come after him. He saith, "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, until the mystic dove singing in the midmost heart of eternity, and the celestial bird warbling upon the divine lote tree saith, Immediately after the oppression of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet."
It's really interesting that he interrupts that verse from Matthew with something else.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an
We
extended
know that's something
ellipses.
different.
Unto the mystic dove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's like that's the start of the passage, but then he, instead of quoting the whole long passage, he just kind of speaks the ellipses point.
In the second gospel, according to Mark, the dove of holiness speaketh in such terms. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. And it singeth later with the same melodies as before, without change or alteration. God verily is a witness unto the truth of my words.
The phrase "neither shall be," I was trying to figure out what it was related to.
What the seeds are.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a affliction which never has been, neither shall be. Like it's affliction which is the worst that will ever be experienced.
Nothing before,
Oh,
nothing after.
Yeah.
Nothing
Neither
before,
shall
nothing,
be.
Neither shall be.
Yeah.
Neither shall be.
This is
Aren't
quoted for the
they
King
referring to
James
Noah?
Bible. So.
Aren't they referring to the dove and Noah? The dove and the olive tree?
Oh, when he talks about the dove of holiness, he's usually referring to Jesus
Oh, Jesus.
as a kind of metonymy, because Jesus received the dove when he was baptized by John.
Yeah.
So,
I see.
and I remember during the translation process, every effort was made to align this with the text of the King James Bible, and so any sort of oddities of the phrasing in English is to be ascribed to the translators of the King James Bible.
It's so funny that they thought you guys.
Which is not the best translation.
It's still really funny to me coming from a Bible theology degree that you guys chose the King James version because we were told never to use the King James version
Right.
in
That's
any
what I learned
translation.
too.
Right.
Yeah, so it was like,
It's a
why
poor
would it
translation.
go on?
What are y'all doing?
Yeah, I was like, what?
Yeah,
But anyway, I won't go into
yeah,
that.
that's
And in the third gospel, according to Luke, it is recorded, there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then they see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, know that the kingdom of God has drawn nigh.
And in the fourth gospel, according to John, it is recorded, "But when the Comforter is to come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me, and ye also shall bear witness." And elsewhere he saith, "But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. And but now I go on my way to him that sent me, and none of you asketh me, Whither goest thou? But because I have said these things unto you, and yet again, nevertheless I tell you the truth, it is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. But if I depart, I will send him unto you. And howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you unto all truth, for he shall not speak of himself, but whosoever he shall hear, that shall he speak, and he will show you things to come."
It's quite a compilation of statements from the Bible in these paragraphs. That,
And they're touching on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John,
yeah.
which
And the
is
guy wasn't even Christian. I mean,
who?
this receiver.
Oh,
Seti.
yeah, that's a good point.
Zoroastrian? No, that was Tabernacle.
Maybe he was a Christian, or maybe,
Oh,
I mean, in the case of the Ugan, I mean,
It's Muslim.
Baha'u'llah also quotes the same passage from the Bible, but he's quoting it to a Muslim.
Right, yeah.
But his point is to,
Would they have been familiar, though, probably with the Bible?
Yeah,
oh yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the Bible was used to talk about Muhammad, like why you should be believing Muhammad. I mean,
Right. And Muhammad
Such a
Muhammad
great argument.
acknowledged the
Yeah.
the
Jesus.
and,
Divinity of
and the
Jesus.
Bible and,
And
the
the
books
Bible.
the books
Yeah.
from before,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
book.
but consider like the strategic value of quoting from Bible verses
Yeah.
to make his point,
Right.
because a Muslim
Because you wouldn't have
interlocutor-
the emotional attachment to
But also, a Muslim interlocutor has to admit that these verses have to be read symbolically and not literally, in order to
Otherwise,
get
you
to the
can't
truth
accept
of.
Muhammad.
Yes.
In other words, you can't accept Muhammad,
I
right?
How can you accept
Yes.
Muhammad
I
if
see.
And so he
you
kind
are-
of forces he cannot disagree with Baha'u'llah that you have to read these Bible verses metaphorically, and says, well,
Yeah.
so it's natural then that you should also do the same with the Quran.
Yeah.
Yeah.